guys are.
Okay, let's go. All right. Thank you, Garen. Good evening, everyone. We are here for the mid-month tribal council meeting. I'll call us to order. It is 5:05 p.m. For our invocation, Garen, would you give our invocation tonight, please?
One or two. And one if you want, or the other one, just let me know.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Chamberlain, for asking me to say the prayer. Aho Mauna, we come to you today to give you thanks for this beautiful day that you bestowed upon us. We ask that those that are in need of prayer, those that are sick, those that are lost, that they find you. We ask that those that are mourning at this time, those that are traveling, that you guide them and you bless them. We ask that you bless our veterans, our soldier men and women that are away from their families. We ask that you bless our elders and our children in this tribe. We ask that you bless the decision makers, those that have gathered here today to make the best decision for our future generations. We give you thanks for the food, the water, our four-legged relatives, our winged relatives, and those that you have provided us with gifts. As we gather here tonight, we want to say thank you for everything that you have bestowed upon us. And once again, we give you thanks for this beautiful day. Ahu.
All right, thank you, Garen. Council, before us, we do have an amended agenda, as well as there will be several items that will be added to that. Do you want to read those added items, Lorelai, or
Okay. Oh,
or I can?
what do you want?
Either way. Okay. Under new business, we have an added number 2, which is the strategic plan for the transportation department, our strategic transportation safety plan. Then we do have 2 executive sessions which are unrelated to one another, and those will be presented separately. And then also a meeting with the U.S. Attorney regarding the Supreme Court decision that occurred in Oklahoma. Are there any other additions to the agenda? If not, do we have a motion to approve as amended?
Motion to approve.
Moved by Eric, second by Isaac. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. Okay. Item number 1, the reading of the minutes from June 21st, 2022 mid-month tribal council meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I move it, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Kenny. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Isaac. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. Minutes number 2 from July 5th, 2022, the regular council meeting minutes.
I move it,
Moved
Mr.
by
Vice
Kenny.
Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Isaac. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. Meeting minutes number 3, July 7th, 2022, Treasurer's Report.
Move it.
Moved by Eric. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Isaac. Any further discussion? My son's birthday. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. And the final minutes we have in front of us from July 11th, 2022, the land meeting and enrollment update, as well as the physical resources meeting minutes.
Move it.
Moved by Eric. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Isaac. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. All right. We do not have any listed 5 signatures for ratification. So, new business item number 1, the enrollment amendment resolution 22-136.
Can I talk, Vice Chair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is in your packet. It says Resolution 22-136, but what happened was the council approved this Resolution 22-136, but there was two typing errors on 2 of the names.
Oh,
And so we have to amend it for those 2 names as 22-136A. But we have to ask enrollment, when they do this, they need to state that in the resolution, amending, and it was due to a typo error. Thank you.
All right. So do we have a motion to approve the amended resolution?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Eric, second by Isaac. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. Okay, new business item number 2.
Joy's on.
Do we have Joy on the line? Joy, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm on the line. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
So in the plan that's before you, you had approved it earlier, I believe in December, and we're bringing it back to add more detail that will allow us to access funding to address the entrance from the cemetery road onto Highway 75, and then also to add a additional entrance with Educare on the west end of Educare onto US Highway 75. We've started some discussions with the Department of Transportation with Nebraska. They already have a project that's going on. They told us about that was coming up, and now they're moving forward with that. So now the funding is actually out there right now. We want to be able to access that, so we need to update our safety plan to include those projects a little more specifically. So we added those. You'll see them at the bottom of page 7 and then on page 8. And then we also have in there, you'll see that we're future, not in this funding that we'll be going after now, but we're also looking at some issues out by Appleton Road, and then also down by the Human Services building there, and down by White Stocking Lane in that area. So addressing all of that. So those will be forthcoming, but we wanted to get those on this plan with more specifics so that we could go after the funding to pursue those projects. Does anybody have any questions on those projects or anything that they'd like to
I have a
ask?
comment.
Isaac?
I just want to say thank you to Joy and Britt for putting this together. I was looking at it earlier today and reading it, and there's a lot of good stuff, good information in here. And I think it'll also help with some of the drainage issues and some of there's a lot of traffic hazards as far as our people approaching the highways and stuff. And I know a lot of times that the senior citizens have a hard time with the pulling out from the cemetery. Some of them aren't as limber as others and aren't able to make that turn. So I kind of look forward to getting that one fixed. And then also with Educare, I think that would also, with the way things are going now, allow emergency vehicles to get in there and be able to exit quicker, and snow removal, all these things. So with that being said, Council, I would make a motion to pass the Strategic Transport Safety Plan.
Second.
Moved by Isaac, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. All right, thank you,
Thank
Joy.
you so much.
Was there anything else with that, or that was good?
That was it. We just need a motion, and then we'll send it up for signature on the last page there, and that way we'll be able to use that in the proposal
All
going
right,
forward.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Have a good evening.
You too. Item number 3. Yeah, the meeting. A few weeks back, I did send an email on this, but I know there's also been some traffic from others regarding this. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta, which essentially negated the previous ruling by the Supreme Court where essentially half of Oklahoma was deemed Indian land, and therefore the state did not have authority, etc. So now, with this decision, the states do have authority. And in some of the reading that I did with that, and then I know we were going to get an update from our legal counsel regarding this, a lot of the effort was tied to, maybe not primarily, culminate or put together for that reason, but they did not want Indian reservations to become a site where women could receive health care services. So the standard, I guess, attack on women's rights that continues in Washington, D.C., and this was an action of that. So were we actually going to have a presentation on this tonight, or was it just a point to hold the meeting with the U.S. Attorney?
I think was doing that, and then she's gonna do it on the general counsel,
Okay.
because we won't get a meeting scheduled with him right away.
Okay. So is there any action to take, or is discussion?
Are we gonna appoint them to schedule that, or?
That would, if the council passes a motion to schedule it, then the chairman will reach out to the U.S. Attorney and we'll set a date to have this discussion with him. But in the meantime, in our CEO report coming up this week, we're gonna talk about this, so we're ready for the meeting with him. But she said, get it scheduled immediately. That was her recommendation
Okay.
from the legal counsel.
So, do we need a motion to do that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll make that a motion to schedule a meeting with the U.S. Attorney.
Moved by Eric. Is there a second? Second by Isaac. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. All right. So that is it for new business, correct? Now, there is no old business on the agenda, so we have the tribal council items. Item number 1, discussion regarding the tribal court assessment. And I do believe Miss Long is on the line. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. We're here, so whenever you're ready.
Brandon's getting the slides up prepared. Mr. Vice Chairman, can I say
Yes,
something
absolutely.
before we start?
Yes.
Just so that the membership, we're doing this tonight because we want the membership to know what changes that we need to work on for our tribal court to make it more timely and more just for all our members. But historically, the U.S. Congress enacted Public Law 83-280 to grant certain states criminal jurisdiction over Indians on reservations and to allow civil litigation that had come under tribal or federal court jurisdiction to be handled by state courts. The Winnebago tribe was in this status because there were 5 states that enacted this: California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Oregon. But back in 1986, our tribe successfully regained the tribal and federal jurisdiction over criminal and civil certain cases, prosecution, which then we had to set up our tribal court system and we had to enact codes. That was in 1986. So just to go over that. So here we go with turning it over to Jacqueline Long.
Jack, you're self-muted.
Maybe you want to explain to the membership who she is, where she comes from, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, Jacqueline, that was a good suggestion. Can you do a brief introduction of yourself, because the membership is watching this meeting?
Yes, I'd be happy to. My name is Jacqueline Long. I have been working with tribes and different Native organizations for, I lost track, over 40 years. I have worked as a tribal attorney. I have worked as a tribal judge. I was appointed at one point to the Supreme Court of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. And I have worked as a public defender in Minneapolis for over 30 years, so I'm familiar with the needs of public defenders. So I'm familiar with tribal courts, county courts, and I think it was for that reason that I was asked to look at the tribal court, Winnebago Tribal Court, and assess how it might be improved, and in particular, what the staff needs might be. especially the public defenders and the prosecutors, whether there was need for more staff. So that is what my background is for doing this assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Lorelei, are you doing the outline of this, or am I going to do the
You're
presentation?
doing it, and then you say, next slide, and then Brandon will do it.
All right, I'm winging it because I don't have my notes from last time in front of me, but okay, I'll do it. All right, next slide, Brandon. This is the mission statement for your tribal court. The Winnebago Tribal Court is dedicated to upholding the integrity and proud tradition of the sovereign Winnebago tribe of Nebraska through the administration of justice in a fair and equitable manner to one and all. Next slide. One of the things I was asked to look at is whether or not there was a problem with the bail system. I had heard there were complaints that people were waiting in custody too long for their hearings. Next slide. I did look in a number of documents that showed who was being held in jail. And overall, there were approximately 7 people that had served long periods of time, but they were in custody for very serious crimes. They were in custody for rape or attempted murder or serious assaults. And when I talked to the different people that I interviewed 27 people for this assessment, people inside the court system, people outside the court system, people that had been, families that had been affected by the court system. And overall, most people thought that the bail system was fairly fair, that the bail amounts were fair, and that overall it was only people with serious offenses that were held in jail. There were a few times people with less serious offenses were held in jail because they missed their court date and therefore had a more higher level of bail and maybe had to wait 5 days to come into court. But overall, the time periods were not too bad. It is something the tribal council should consider as whether or not they want to go through their bail amounts, but I didn't particularly see a problem there. What I did see that was unusual was that your tribal code does not require speedy trials for, I don't have the example in front of me, but I believe it's 4 months. No, it's 6 months. And I believe it was set at that because Nebraska is 6 months. Most places have a shorter period of time. There are states like Minnesota where for a misdemeanor, you have to have your trial within a month if you're in jail, and 3 months if you're off in jail for a misdemeanor, and 3 months if it's a felony. And a lot of, and then there's time periods in between. I think the Tribal Council should consider revising Tribal Code 1B315 to require speedy trials within a shorter time period. What I did bring up is that right now you're short-staffed. Your prosecutor is definitely short-staffed. And your prosecutor also does not have control over the fact that he relies on testing by federal labs, and they take their time. There was a rape case, for example, where he was still waiting for the results in that rape, which of course would be very important in the trial that was coming up. Things like that happen. So that would be something you might want to consider. You might want to get yourself fully staffed before you shorten your speedy trial period. Next slide. There are alternatives to incarceration that the court could have, but it's too bad you don't have. Next slide. The chief judge told me if he had staff to monitor people that are waiting trial, pre-trial monitoring it's called, he would be much more willing to release people. Let's say someone on a domestic assault case where you're a little concerned that it's probably a man, the man that's being charged might run back to his home and harm someone. If you had monitoring, where he could know that person was being watched, that or a person would be required not to be drinking, he would be less likely to perhaps let that person out of jail so they can maintain their job, etc. The court used to have an ankle bracelet program which should allow monitoring where these people are at all times. It does cost money, but I think that tribe could obtain some other funding to get their ankle bracelet program back in place. And this would be another way that people could be out of jail while waiting for their court hearings. So those were two recommendations: hire staff for pretrial monitoring and purchase and maintain an ankle bracelet monitor system. Next slide. Everyone knows that there is a limit of jail possibilities. I just thought it would be helpful for the people in the tribe to see what is being used for facilities. This is the priority that the chief of your police told me he uses. There's a Thurston County Jail 20 miles away. If that refuses, they sometimes refuse people because they've had bad experiences with them in the past or they're full. Then the police officers have to go 90 minutes away to Yankton County. And after that, they have to be taken 2.5 hours away to Wagner, South Dakota. And then there's the Lower Brule Jail, which is 5 hours away. I believe the next two jails that are listed here are for juveniles. The juveniles have a much bigger problem. There is your juvenile facility that was a wonderful idea that you have established for temporary holding of juveniles, but after a certain period of time, if they have to be held longer, they have to go to Cherokee, Iowa, which is 120 miles away, or Standing Rock, which is 6.5 hours away. All of this takes valuable police time, driving back and forth. Now, what is the answer for that? That's a tough one, because it would be very expensive to build your own jail and maintain it. It's very expensive. But next slide. I just recommended that the police chief should regularly investigate and report to the tribal council on any new jail contracts available to the tribe, so that possibly you could find some location that is closer. Next slide. Right now, you have a lack of a very good computer case system in your courts. The case system you do have says very little. And you need something where all of your staff and the people that work with your staff, like the police officers, the probation officers, the social workers, can look up the cases and know what is happening, what the decisions were. Next slide. There was a recommendation for a new system. I believe there's money for it, but there's been, for some reason, it's been held up. And the judges are very busy, so I recommended that the court administrator take over the purchase of the new computer system to expedite the process. Then they're going to have to create a schedule for computer training for all the staff and data transfer as soon as possible. This is going to take some time, but it's going to be very much better for everyone in the tribe to have accurate record keeping of what is going on in your court. I want to give you an example of how this does affect people. The police chief told me that because you don't have the system, he might be out and about with his officers and see someone that he believes has a warrant. So they arrest him. The guy sits over the weekend for court on Monday, only to find on Monday that the warrant had been dropped 2 weeks before and the person should never have been arrested. That's an example of how you need a computer system so everyone involved in the system can get up-to-date information of what is happening on each case. Next slide. You're still going to need paper records, and unfortunately, the file systems that currently exist are poorly kept. Next slide. I recommended that as your clerks have time, they need to go through and organize all the files chronologically with case activity sheets inside, so anyone opening file can find what's in there and find where it is in the file. There's JFJ cases. These are the cases where children have been taken into custody and perhaps in foster care. They're very large files because these cases go on for a long time and there may be 4 or 5 children in the family. They're very lengthy and they need a lot of organization. You have your staff lunchroom in the same room as this filing system. That's not very secure. So I suggested that a new staff lunch area be created in the courthouse, that the case file room should be locked and only the clerks and perhaps the judges be allowed to go in and out of there, and it has to be very well organized. Next slide. This is one of the key questions I was asked. Do you need new personnel? When I interviewed, I discovered that what's very clear is that the prosecutors are very overloaded. Next file. This is your current tribal court staff. You have a court administrator, Jennifer Berridge. You have a chief judge, Patrick Runge. Then you have a number of associate judges that come in for a day apiece. You have one tribal prosecutor, Peter Monzel. And there used to be someone that did the JFJ cases. She is no longer there, and there's a real need to replace her. I'll get to that in a minute. You have a juvenile probation officer, a bail process server, an adult probation officer, one criminal clerk, one civil clerk, one victim advocate for adults, one for juveniles, and a paralegal, and one public defender that's there a lot of hours, Mark Farrell, but there's also a number of contract public defenders that come in and out. Next file. Now, in recent years, there have been less cases. In 2018, there were 730 criminal cases. We're talking criminal now. 2019, there were 567. And then COVID hit and the numbers went down. 2020, there were 451. 2021, there were 427. This is overall happening around the country because people just aren't they're in their houses. They're not getting in trouble as much. There have not been group events to have disruptions happen. But we do anticipate that the cases are going to go back up in number as we get out of COVID and hopefully resume our normal lives. Next slide. Now, we just saw the numbers, and in all of those years, there were more than 400 criminal cases in your court system. The American Bar Association recommends that no public defender have an annual caseload more than 400 cases of felonies and misdemeanors combined. Clearly, you can see your main public defender has more than that. And as COVID goes away, we're going to anticipate a bigger caseload. And as you're going to see, I'm recommending there be more prosecutors, and that's going to raise the public defender's caseload quite a bit also. Next slide. So overall, my recommendation is, I should explain a little bit, the prosecutor is clearly very overstressed. He needs help in the criminal area, so I'm recommending 2 prosecutors in the criminal area and an additional prosecutor for JFJ cases. I'm recommending 2 public defenders in the criminal area and an additional public defender in the JFJ cases. We'll get to that in a minute. And 2 criminal clerks, and when we get to the civil side, I'm also recommending 2 civil clerks. Next slide. I had heard some complaints about some contract public defenders. I tried to interview, but they did not answer my calls and canceled my appointment. And this is the type of treatment I've heard that the clients are getting, so it's not hard to believe that there is a problem here. What I've seen overall around the country is you have some public defenders that are very dedicated to their clientele. Mark Farrell is very well liked. I didn't hear one complaint about him. He seems to really talk to his clients and care. On the other hand, you have public defenders that come in for one case. They don't talk to their clients very much. They're somewhat hurt with them. I've heard a lot of complaints. It's just the nature of the job. You need to hire people that have a heart for the job, that are willing to spend a number of days on the reservation and are committed to it. And I don't think that using contract public defenders to come in for an hour or 2 really works, unless you're forced into it by cases that require you to have 3 or 4 different attorneys, which can happen when you have a child custody case and different members of the family to represent. But overall, I recommend, next slide, that you employ 2 public defenders with longer hours and utilize the contract attorneys only when several attorneys are needed for a case. And I recommend that the court administrator, who seems to know what's going on with these people, should determine which contracts, make a recommendation which contracts should be renewed for the different public defenders. Next slide. Your courthouse has very little security. I was given an electronic fob to get in and out of the exterior door. And I understand there's some sort of security archway, perhaps to check for firearms, that has not been installed yet. But that definitely should be installed, and this is a list of what you need for any courthouse. Security doors and archways, cameras in all the courtrooms, entranceways and halls, security screens in an attached room, either in your police squad room or in a separate room with a security officer to monitor them. Panic alarms in the courtroom and offices to call an officer immediately. And there's no holding cells for inmates when they come in for court. Basically, an officer comes in with someone in handcuffs and has to wait in the hallway or in an empty office waiting for their hearing. And it's not secure. And there probably is a need to separate juveniles and adults, men and women, so I'm recommending 2 holding cells. You have a bailiff, but he also has the job of serving subpoenas all around the reservation. So really, in reality, he's gone most of the day. I never saw a bailiff in any hearing that I watched. So you need to have those responsibilities separated and have a bailiff at every hearing that is preferably a trained officer, and have your service person who's serving people around the reservation be a separate job. Next file. I recommended that a secured archway should be installed immediately and all personnel appointed should enter through it. Funding should be sought for a deputy to supervise that entranceway and serve as bailiff for any court proceeding where the judge deems it appropriate, and the process server position should be a separate position. Next file. Now, you had some wonderful court improvements. I've mentioned the juvenile facility that serves both as a shelter and also a secure place for your juveniles as they're brought in. I was also there when a young woman I wasn't in the assessment, but I was in the building. When a young woman came in distress, she was assessed, and it was discovered she had some suicidal tendencies, and she was referred immediately to the hospital for assistance. That was impressive. You have a very good system there for getting an assessment of different types of problems for your juveniles when they get into trouble or found on the streets. But you had some other programs that unfortunately were grant money programs that terminated after a couple of years that would be nice to have them brought back. I understood a lot of work was put into them, and then they ended for lack of grant money. Next file. You had a tribal traditional wellness program that brought elders in from the community to mentor young people as they were brought into juvenile court. This is something that's going on in different tribes around the country, and I understand it went well. And I think it especially was used in regard to the juvenile drug court and keeping young people from getting into drugs and talking about traditional values and traditional ways. The tribal code was changed with whole sections for these programs, but because these programs did not have long-term funding, they ended. And I am suggesting that they be brought back, if at all possible. Next file. To recap, these are the recommendations I made for the criminal side of the court. I don't think we need to go through this again. Next file. Now I'll talk about the civil court. The civil court includes the JFJ cases, which is what the cases are called, when children are taken from their families and are in foster care. Next file. These cases are very heart-wrenching and difficult, and I do think you need a prosecutor to really focus on these and work with your social workers on an ongoing basis to do the best job as possible on them. They also need some training because you have some wonderful sections of your tribal code that, for example, require the children be placed in their own families, if at all possible, with a whole priority system of different grandparents and aunties and uncles. I'm sorry, I don't remember the Ho-Chunk names, but I understand it's a very special family lineage system that is in your code. I've seen it. I was very impressed. That is supposed to be followed in these cases, and everyone in the system should know this and be following it. There's also a special section in your tribal code that gives grandparents rights to be heard in these hearings. And I'll discuss that a little bit later about whether that's really being used. Next file. I am recommending that this position, that there is some money for at least another year for this prosecutor, and that there will be a permanent funding source found for this position. Next file. The tribal code provides that parents, guardians, or other legal custodians can have an attorney in these hearings, the JFJ hearings, but at their own expense. Next file. I am recommending that that code be changed to remove at their own expense. The tribe should hire and provide a public defender and attorney to represent any parent, custodian, or guardian that is facing removal of a child during all hearings regarding that child. This is very, very important. I watched a number of hearings, and a person who is not an attorney who is having a child taken is in a very frightening position. And first of all, they don't understand many of the words involved. And even if they did, they're looking at a judge who they want to please. They know the judge has the power to take their child, and they want to make that child like them. So they have a tendency to agree with whatever the judge asks. And they don't understand that what they really should do is demand every right that they have and make sure that the tribe can really prove that they need that child removed in the first place, and really understand what they need to do to get that child back, which is usually a long list of items. Next file. So I do think an additional public defender is needed for the JFJ cases. This is going to be a tough job. I did this myself, 2-3 year periods. They're difficult cases, and frankly, they're stressful. But you need to find someone who would be dedicated to doing this work, to represent your people and make sure they understand everything that they have to do in court. Next file. So that's my recommendation there, add that position. Next file. I worked in a very successful program in Minneapolis where we represented Native American people losing their child to foster care or adoption. And we discovered that on top of having an attorney, the people needed day-to-day assistance for all the things they needed to do to get their children back. Things like finding housing, applying for welfare, getting into the right alcohol program, knowing what type of paperwork to prove they finished their program or to prove they had their evaluation they needed ready for court. There's just a lot of work the day-to-day that needs to be done with these people. And we trained street people from the community that were not attorneys, had never been to law school, many of them not even college, but they knew the community, they knew the programs, and we trained them in what they had to do to be legal advocates in court. And it was a very successful program. And I believe you need someone in your tribal court on a day-to-day basis to be there, especially since your public defender may be only coming in for a day or two from maybe someplace like Omaha. This would be a person that would be day to day in your courts to answer these people's questions and work with them to improve their lives, really to improve their lives and prepare their case for court. Next slide. So I recommended that the tribal court should include a position of parent, custodian, advocate to work in tandem with the public defender in JFJ cases. Next slide. I asked the question, does the tribal court sufficiently utilize tribal staff and culture relevant materials in the JFJ case plans? Next slide. There are a number of very good treatment programs and advocacy groups that you have in your area. I was introduced to the Fatherhood is Sacred and Motherhood is Sacred program that I understand used to be regularly ordered by the courts, by the chief judge in a lot of the cases. And for some reason, it no longer is ordered as much. Whenever possible, the tribal court should use culturally based programs, things that are developed by your own tribe, tribal people, and use them to help the people in your court improve their lives. Next slide. Tribal Code 4-109 requires that any child being placed for foster care adoption should be placed first with its parents, then with its, I'm not going to say this right, Koka or Gaga, then with its Nani or Jaji, I'm sorry, I don't know the language, and on through a list of 12 levels of preference. This is a whole placement system that I mentioned before, but is in your tribal code. It's wonderful. I don't see a whole lot of tribes with this, but it really outlines your cultural preferences for your families and the names for the different relatives and says what should be done. And every social worker should be going down that list and know exactly for any child who are its parents, who are its grandparents, who are its aunties and uncles, who's available, why are they not available, and so on and so forth, so they know why these family members are not being used. Before a child is placed with a non-family member, placed off the reservation, etc., they need to have done this whole system of research. Next slide. I did have a discussion with the chief judge, and he did agree. He says that the system is being used. Now, I had other people say they didn't think it was being used. But one thing we did agree on is that a placement preference form that outlines for each child, as I just said, a little family chart should be in every child's case file that says for every hearing why that child is not with the grandma, why he's not, or he or she's not with auntie, and on down the line, so we know for each hearing that this has been looked at and what the situation currently is with this family. And that should be in every case file. Is the tribal court sufficiently utilizing the input of grandparents? Your tribal code says that a grandparent shall be permitted to provide input on custody or placement actions involving the grandchild. The court shall take into consideration grandparent input whenever practical. Now, I talked to a number of grandparents who had been in court on hearings about their grandchildren. They said they felt they really weren't heard. They said what happened is they might be there, they might have been notified about the hearing, and they would be there. But basically, they felt that the discussion went on between the main parties and the attorneys and so forth. A decision was made, and then perhaps the judge might turn to them at the end and say, do you agree with this? They would prefer that they would have been asked at the very beginning, even perhaps before the court even started, what they thought should happen here, where they thought the child should be placed, and maybe have that research before we even started the hearing. So I don't think as a practical matter, they're having the involvement that the tribal code considered, was anticipating. Next slide. So I recommended that the tribal court and the parties preparing reports, these are mainly social workers, for any recommendation of any JFJ placement or custody issue shall obtain and include the grandparents' opinion as part of the report and consideration prior to any recommendations or hearing on the matter. So they're included before the court hearing, and that their opinion is recorded. Next slide. How can the tribal court strengthen trust in its procedures and decisions among the people of the tribe? Next slide. Now, your tribal court, your tribe, like most tribes in this country, relies on judges. Your chief judge is white. You have a Native American judge. You have a judge that his family is of African descent. Not to say they're bad judges, but it's hard to find. It would be ideal if you had judges and attorneys from your tribe, but that's very difficult to accomplish. They have quite a number at the Ho-Chunk tribe in Wisconsin. I'd like to talk to them and find out how they were so successful. But most tribes are in the situation you are. They're using attorneys, prosecutors, and public defenders that are white. They come in from Omaha. They're not from your tribe. And most important, the decision-making isn't necessarily being made by members of your tribe. Now, what other tribes have done is create councils of tribal members to oversee the tribal courts. Now, I presented this example of, I believe this is the Ottawa tribe in Michigan, has this commission in their, this is part of their tribal code, where they have a group of 5 tribal members that advise the tribal court in everything. What their decisions are, what foster care placements they use, who gets hired, everything. Next slide. My recommendation is that the tribal court to make a step forward in self-governance, and look at your tribal members. You know who are the wise ones, who are the ones that are respected, who are the ones that might make the best judgment about where your children should be. And appoint 5 of them to sit on a commission and rotate, sitting in maybe groups of 3 for decision making in these foster care and the foster care cases. They could make the decisions. Now people say, well, they're not attorneys. How can they do that? Well, think about it. Juries are not attorneys for the most part. Juries listen to the law in a case. They listen to all the facts in maybe a 3-week-long trial. Then they go in a room and decide guilty or not guilty and whether someone has to sit in prison for 30 years. That's a decision that lay people make all the time. And I really believe it wouldn't take very much training for you to have tribal members that could oversee your whole system and sit in as judges for these JFJ cases. In fact, the Ho-Chunk tribe in Wisconsin has a very successful training program for what they call lay advocates to work in their court system. And that might be where you could go with your tribal people to learn what they need to know to sit in on cases and understand and make decisions there. So this would take some work. It would take some tribal code changes, but not a whole lot. And you could create a system where, especially in the cases that involve your children, the civil cases, you could have your own people make the decisions. Next slide. I also saw that there was some upset about the tribal council getting involved, overlapping in some of its activities in the tribal court. And I looked and there was some thought that you had a separation of powers clause in your tribal code, but I looked and I did not see it. And I researched and I found that's true for a lot of tribes, that when you all created your tribal courts, you used some federal guidelines that did not include separation of powers. So next slide. I recommended that the tribal constitution be amended to include a separation of powers clause. Next slide. I was also asked by your CAO to not worry about money and recommend what should be in a new courthouse. If you took your new money you may have from your new enterprises and created a new courthouse. This is the Ho-Chunk Nation Courthouse in Wisconsin. They hired an architect and worked with their architect to create this beautiful building. Next slide. Next slide. I worked with Jennifer Barrage, who is your tribal court administrator, and also talked to your police chief, because he would very much like to see the police department in the same building, and that could be helpful for a number of reasons. But these are the different rooms and the different rooms that would be needed in the courthouse to cover all the different people that I've talked about in this assessment and giving everyone office space. Next slide. And the police could be in the same building. They could provide some of the security that is lacking. They could be the ones that monitor the screening room, where the cameras would watch what's going on in your courtroom and your hallways. And they could be right there to respond if someone had a difficulty and pushed a panic button. So it could be, and also they could be right there to bring in people that were in custody for court hearings. It could be helpful in several different ways to have the police department in the same building. Next slide. Thank you for listening. And does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Jacqueline. The information that you provided is something that the council has been considering ever since it was first presented to us in the finalized forms that we've received. I know that there has to be quite a bit more deliberation around the table regarding all of the various facets of the information that's being presented, as well as some of the others that maybe they just didn't get enough time to be included, or we just simply overlooked it for some reason. But at the same time, I think that what is being presented and what has been presented is definitely a very good start and a very good step forward, because it brings to light what a lot of the tribal members are thinking and how they feel. And then, of course, the membership around the table as well. Now what we have to do is decide which course of action we're going to take and how we are going to, I guess, best achieve each one of the goals that we're going to go after. Because the recommendations that you gave, I think, are right on point. I don't want the council to, however, get lost in thinking that that is the end-all be-all list. And I know you're not presenting it that way as well. Because as we continue to evolve our court system, I think one of the probably the best ways to look at this entire process is one of the points that you brought forward. The tribal court did not exist at the establishment of the current, I guess, corporate charter, or the way that the tribe was set up under its constitution. It came far after, I mean, many, many decades after that first document was put into place. And so with that being said, and now knowing that, we can understand and assess in a better way why things were set up the way that they were. And of course, money is always a big, part of that equation. But then also begin to, like I said earlier, move us into a direction to where our court system can provide not only just equal justice under the law, which ought to be kind of a thing that goes without saying, but, as we are all aware, you'd be surprised. And then at the same time, providing for a way to provide that equal protection, provide justice, and then also work in the best ways to keep our tribal families together. So are there any comments or questions from the council? Isaac.
I just wanted to say thank you to you for doing that for us. And then I think some of the low-bearing fruit to try to start out with that would be to at least get a couple prosecutors hired, and then the public defenders straighten that out there. And that would kind of help move things along, because a lot of times there's things, depending on what side of it you're on, things just don't ever move fast enough. And I think one of the things is that all of these, if you look at it and you break this list down that you brought to us, if you look at it, it's a system, and the system's broke, and it's been broke. And so I think one of those things is that now that we kind of have it in somewhat of a prioritized list, it's a little bit easier to start in on, because one of the things when you start trying to take one of these things apart and really diagnose it of what's wrong with it and where's it falling apart at, sometimes you'll get lost in the middle of all of that, because there's all kinds of stuff that go on. You stumble on from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and then you forgot what you started with. And so having it on paper, I think that's really helpful. And I want to say thank you to you for taking the time and coming in and helping us out down here and trying to get us on the right track. And so I just wanted to say that, and I kind of really want to encourage the council to try to get things going in that means. So thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Anyone else?
Like to.
Eric?
Yes, I too would like to say thank you for coming down here and taking the time out to investigate and see how our ship is run through the court down there. And, you know, there's a lot of good recommendations and a lot of direction that was given. And so I think that we have a good foundation to keep going with. But, you know, when you come down here, you were asking questions and you were given the answers, the simple answers. But what you didn't see were the decisions that have been made in the past with our tribal members and our children. And so when it comes to separation of powers, you know, I'm kind of glad that there's not really any, because we've been going through a time recently where a lot of our children have been going off the reservation under the direction of the individuals in that court down there. And so we've been trying to bring our children back home. And with the information you provided, that I think we have a good foundation to move forward with in that direction, in that sense. And so with that said, again, just like to say thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Any other comments or questions?
Louis,
Yes, Louis.
I want to thank the presenter for what you told us. You didn't tell us what we wanted to hear. You told us the facts. I have on the table. I appreciate that. The onus is on the council to provide the employees, to provide a plan for facilities. We won't be going 450 miles to house a prisoner. This is a lot of work. We gotta get together as a council and figure out who we're gonna put to work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Eric?
One more thing. One thing that I kind of was wondering that I kind of wanted to see that come out of this was the complaints on the judges and all the individuals that were down there, to see the numbers of the complaints that came in, the complaints for the adults, the children. How many of those complaints were the same from different individuals? How many of those complaints were dealt with accordingly? How many complaints came in that were the same on the same individual, that nothing happened to that individual? Being reprimanded all the way to being fired. That's kind of one of the things I was really looking forward to when we had this, when we started talking about having that court investigated. And with all the entities wrapped up with the courthouse, CFS, the police station, maybe even a little bit from the hospital, because a lot of our individuals go from between the hospital, the police department, and the courthouse. In that triangle, there's a big hole in the middle where a lot of our enrolled members are falling through, and because it's always going like 24 hours a day, because crime and abuse, that doesn't stop just between 8 and 4. It doesn't just operate within those hours. That happens 24 hours a day on weekends and holidays. And so while it's operating, things aren't done as just as they could be. And, you know, hanging on to a lot of our enrolled members are children that's kind of why the council had to get involved in some places. And so that's kind of what I was looking for, the outcome of this for today, way back in the beginning, like a year ago when we started talking about this, that's kind of one of the things that I would have liked to see brought light to, or have light brought to, is the complaints, because that's still a question that I would like to see answered. You know, however we go about that from here, you know, I would still like to see how many complaints there have been come in on each of our individuals down there. Because we hear about this, you know, we live down here, and we hear about these, we see them in our own families. And so I personally think that something needs to change down there, and some of those individuals need to be replaced. But as far as the wish list of what you see and what you recommend, I hope that we magically get trillions of dollars so we can hire all these people and do everything and build things. But with what little bit we have right now, that's the people we're looking after that are in that process of the courthouse or the PD or the hospital in those 3 places. That's what we're looking after right now. So anyways, I just want to say that I forgot about that, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. So, you know, in any future endeavor you have in that doing something like this, to maybe bring that up as well. And so for the council, you know, it was just kind of something that I was thinking of and watching, that one of the things that I really wanted to have answered in this. And so maybe in talks down the road, we can come to that and find those answers of the complaints and everything about the complaints. So with that said, thank you. Thank you for your time. Again, thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. I
Colin.
enjoyed it very much.
Jacqueline, thanks for coming down. Thanks for the assessment. It's the only thing that I want to comment on and hope and pray that we do need help. We do have problems, and somehow this court helps us with the only thing. There was some harsh crimes mentioned, but reuniting our families, reuniting our children with their mothers and fathers, if that's possible. And that's most important. Most important to us, to me, you know, that somehow our programs, you know, we make a change and we start reuniting our children with their mothers and fathers, and this may help. So thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Coley. Anyone else? Isaac.
Just to add to it. So, I was kind of looking at this and trying to take this apart in my head. So, one of the things with, I would say, the council in one of these meetings here, either we put a committee together, and a part of that be some of the court staff, and then we look at what do we want to go after first, and then how much is it going to cost, and then come back and visit with the table of how could we move that money over there, how could we go and chase that money and get it and do this, and then make that list off of what's been recommended here, and then develop a plan of how we can accomplish these things over time. We're not going to be able to fix everything all at the same time. That would be nice, but at least it's a start in the right direction, is to develop a plan of saying, here's how we're going to go about this, here's how we're going to try to make it a little bit better, and then be realistic, put a deadline on it for ourselves. So we have to try to meet at least this far down the road by this time frame. You know, maybe it's 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, something like that, and then slowly just chip away at it. Because there's going to be opportunities that are going to come along and present themselves along the way while we're working on this. But if we just take this report and let it sit and idle, nothing's going to be done, and that's really going to be frustrating because of the time that we put into this so far, the money that we spent so far just to get it to this point. So I would want to encourage the council that to try to step forward and take that on. That's something that I would be willing to do, but I don't have the answers to everything, but just to try to move that along. Because this ties into the court system ties into law enforcement ties into CFS, human services. It's all one system, the alcohol program, all of that. So we can't just fix one part of that. We have to look at the whole thing and say, when Isaac gets the cops called on him and they arrest him, he gets thrown in jail. Well, where's he going to jail? For how long? When he gets out, then how does he get his life back on track, utilizing our programs and being able to do those things, hooking that all together? What does that look like, and how long would that take, and how much funding would that be? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Isaac. Any other comments or questions? I don't want to cut anyone's opportunity to speak, but one action that I was looking to come with this, because we weren't specifically going to move on one specific topic. Again, there's a lot of information to continue to assess and digest, so to speak. So with that, the chair will entertain a motion to table the tribal court assessment from 2022. What this does under the rules of order is provide it a kind of everlasting life, if you will, to at which point the council can draw it back down and continue the planning consideration. Is there a motion to that effect? Moved by Coley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Eric. Any further discussion? Yes.
Does that mean table it in fiscal year 2022?
No, the assessment is from 2022. That's why I said the date, because I don't know if there were other assessments and I don't want them confused.
Okay, so when we say 2023, are we thinking after October 1st we're going to move forward on something?
Never said 23. No, the council's consideration for action on the assessment, as well as the other areas that are outside of the assessment, can occur at any time. This just simply does not dispose of this assessment by saying, oh, thanks, Jacqueline, see you later. It allows it to live on.
Oh, okay, I see.
Any further discussion?
Who was the second?
Me.
Coley,
Moved by Coley, second by Eric.
Okay.
Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. And ironically, with that being said, I do want to reiterate our gratitude and thanks for your assistance in this assessment, Jacqueline. Hopefully we will be speaking to you many times again soon, and the tribe will find its way through this to the solutions that are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, next are the executive session items, I believe. One is here.
Motion to go into executive session.
Moved by Eric. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Coley. Without objection, we are in executive session at 6:13. We'll do item number 1. Are we going, thank you, Alex. You can stay. I mean, we're going to finish up. Are we?
Thank you very
Was there
much.
anyone else watching, Garen, or?
Nobody's on the Zoom, but there's a couple people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we're back in live set, okay. So the two executive session items have been heard and considered. The first executive session item, the chair will entertain a motion to table it.
I'll move, Mr.
Its
Chair.
request. Moved by Kenny, is there a second? Yes.
Second.
Second by Eric.
Would it be to table and freeze that position?
I would look for those to be separate motions. This is to table the request for executive session item number 1. Moved by Kenny, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carried. Then the subsequent, is there a motion to freeze the hiring process related to the position denoted?
Move it.
Moved by Eric, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kenny. Any further discussion? Any objections? Object? 1. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand or saying aye.
Aye.
Louis, Kenny, Coley, Eric. Where are you at, Lorelei?
I have to abstain.
Okay. No? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Motion carried. 402. Okay. Any other items? Am I forgetting something? I don't think so. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Moved by Eric. Is there a second? Second by Rona. Without objection, we are adjourned at 7:45 p.m. Thank you, council. Thank you to our viewers and everyone
night,
that
Alex.
participated. We appreciate
Good night.
your time. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. You got us